Hello and welcome to this first chapter from SM447, System Processes and Technologies. Today we're going to be talking about electronic marketing, and so this is our first chapter. In order to understand how electronic marketing works, it's a good idea to understand how the internet evolved and where we're going. And so that's part of our learning objectives. We also want to understand how domain name works. That is, when we type in an address or a URL, how do we get to certain websites, and different ways that people can access the internet. So here we have a history or a brief timeline of the internet. And for those of you that don't know, the internet grew out of military technology developments back in the late 50s. Then it turned into something called ARPANET for the U.S. Department of Defense. And then we finally get, in the early 70s, we get the first email application is used. And so that was used at universities in order to speed up communications. Then a little after that, we started getting different protocols that we could use on the internet. And those protocols give us today of things like secure access. What if it's an email? Different extensions. Um, Things like HTTP, which is a protocol for communicating over the internet using a web browser, and so on. Probably this timeline that you're seeing on your screen now is the most important to understand, in that in the early 80s, this is also the same time we started getting little PCs. We developed the protocols for TCP and IP, which allows us to communicate over a network and be able to identify different computers or devices on that network. And so that's called TCP/IP, and everybody has a IP address on their browser, or not browser, but on their computer, and that's what that's referring to. Um, then we have what is known as the father of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee. He's still active. If you go out on YouTube, you could probably find some different videos that he's still putting out. Something that's probably didn't morph into something more notable that you see here is that in the late 90s we had XML, which stands for Extensible Markup Language. And this is a language that allows us to use different types of tags in order to have different pages and content that we want to send over the internet. Now, what we that morphed into is probably XHTML, which is a little more standardized, but they've since abandoned that, and that's not listed in your book here, and gone to HTML5, which is not XML based. And so that's the direction that we're currently going in terms of the internet development. Some other things that have happened that you might be aware of is we've got Google that's using YouTube, we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got different types of browsers. Probably the main browsers are Chrome and Firefox and Safari. There are other browsers that are out there that businesses use for whatever reason. It could be security, because their applications that they're programming in-house don't work best with a certain type of browser. It's not one of those main types of browsers like Chrome, Safari, or Firefox. So with the internet, it's all about sharing information and being connected. And so we need to be able to connect to other devices, whether that's wirelessly or through a wire. And we can actually link our content to content that's on our own servers or other servers, and that's known as a hyperlink. Now, when we type in an address, I mentioned earlier, we type in a URL, and so this is a uniform resource locator. So if we were in a browser, that's what you would actually be typing in to go to a certain area. So now I'm currently in your website. I'm going to grab some bar, move it around. And so when you look here, this is what we mean by the URL. So if we went to Western, let me bring up another tab here. This is the URL for Western, so it's www.wku.edu. And the browsers are written now so that you don't even have to put in the protocol before it, but you can if you like. And that protocol was HTTP colon slash slash. It gets you to the same site. And so here in Chrome, it's just deleting it off. All right. So we've mentioned the URL already. A domain name, or the domain, is that it's a unique name that identifies the site. So here, Quark would be the domain. Biz would be the type of domain it is. We can also talk about IP addresses, structured series of dots. Usually this is it's 4 octets, or 4 with numbers 0 through 7 that you can have, and then a dot, and so on. And so Western has its own IP address. The problem is it'd be hard to remember these IP addresses. It's easier to type in this address. I don't know if this address is the same as this IP address, but Western has an IP address as well, and it would be 161 dot number. So in terms of doing some e-marketing, you need to understand how people access the internet, and then based on what they're using to access the internet, you need to design ads or content for those devices. So mobile phones seems to be taking off quite a bit lately. A lot of people are doing transactions using mobile phones or getting away from desktops. They're also using other types of handheld small devices. Could be an iPad, could be some kind of internet reader, could be some kind of notebook. I know I have a Surface Pro. That's another category of devices. It's a tablet that you don't see here. And so you need to, when you do some research, if you're using something like Google Analytics, and look at your site, you can actually tell what kind of device somebody's using when they access your domain name. Another thing you need to understand is how are people accessing the internet in terms of when. It's knowing when they're accessing the internet or accessing your site that you can send out promotions. So if they're doing it at home, chances are they're getting on early in the morning or after work or late in the evening. So that's when you want to target your customers. It's also when you want to look for people coming onto your website and what they're looking for. If it's at the office, it's probably not going to be that much of a demand coming from office, in the middle of the day. But it is something that if they do get onto your site, they want to see something quickly and either purchase it or do whatever you want them to do and move on. So you need to make that available to them as well. People can also go to libraries and different education centers, although I think that's kind of becoming less and less as more and more people have their own devices. It also depends on where you're at. If you're in a small rural country that's very poor, you might have these type of access centers. Also, you might have these internet cafes and coffee shops. And actually, even in this country, these type of businesses are using their internet in order to attract people to come in, buy something that they're selling, and then sit there and enjoy whatever they bought, but also access the internet. So you want to be able to provide that access to them as well in those type of businesses. So continuing on, as I mentioned, the environment in which people access the internet, it also affects how they're going to use the internet. If they have to go to a cafe every time, then they're probably not going to use the internet as much. The next item, the purpose of using the internet, has to deal a lot with, they're doing a search engine and they're looking for something. Will they be able to find it? So your job as a developer and somebody who's doing e-marketing is to design something so that people can find whatever they're looking for quickly and then go ahead and do what you're wanting them to do with that information. You should also understand that the internet serves to be a communications channel. Now, what they're communicating is also going to be different. Sometimes it's text, sometimes it's voice, sometimes it's video, and so that's also going to have a play in terms of how you're going to reach out to people that are accessing your site over the internet. Sometimes that internet can just be a research channel. That is, you're using that and the devices that they're using to access your site in order to determine how to best reach those people, how to best communicate with them, and how to do any kind of marketing to them. So hopefully I've given you some good examples of how the role of the internet will be in terms of marketing. We can use it for different types of conversations, and we can monitor how people view our products or services. And so this internet becomes a huge hub of different types of conversations that we can use to help our business. So that ends this first chapter, and hopefully I've given you a good overview of how the internet plays a role in terms of our electronic marketing.